Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Operation Gladio Meets Secret Societies with Warhamster Brady. How are you today? I heard you had some excitement.
I have. So I've become a little bit of a scholar on the behavior of yellow jackets in New England. And apparently, about this time of year, it gets colder, and the queen runs off, pollinates herself, and hides in the tree bark or something, but leaves behind a colony who will eventually die. But as it gets colder, they want to come inside. Well, our nest is up here on the third floor, right outside my attic in my third floor loft office, and I have killed somewhere like 65 yellow jackets in the last 3 days. So if I'm in the middle of the stream and I get up with my fly swatter, that's what's going on there.
All right.
It's been fun. Yes. It's been pretty much every 20 minutes I get up and kill one. It's been fun. It's better than getting stung.
It is definitely better than getting stung.
Okay. God, what do you want to talk about today, huh?
I don't know. You're the driver. Where are we going?
Well, let's talk about where we've been. And obviously, the whole big picture down, theory we've been talking about is how these connected families join secret societies, use it as more than just networking, and they get themselves in the positions of power throughout our diplomatic corps, of all political offices, the military, absolutely the intelligence, the multinational businesses, and they all work together towards pretty much the same foreign policy, which is about exploiting resources and labor in foreign countries. And of course, when you do that, you've got to, the governments there have to cooperate. And if they don't, Operation Gladio kicks in and regime change operations. And that's the big picture. And to make this work, you've got to control the media across the board. And we find these same people popping up into influential positions throughout the major media corporations, shipping companies, oil, you name it, time and time again. It's a small handful, and it really is small. It's more, it's hundreds and thousands. It's probably maybe 5,000-10,000 people that are part of this club, but it's really a handful if you compare it to the population, how much power these people wield. Okay, so when I'm going to share my screen here. When last we left off, we took a little diversion to talk about Lincoln spies and counterfeiters and how they use counterfeiting basically to win the air quote Civil War. And before that, we were talking about the last family talked about here were the McCormicks. And can you pull that up on screen?
I don't see it yet.
It should be there. I see it. There it is.
I got it.
So we talked about these McCormick family, which basically had a monopoly. Well, they were the Chicago Tribune family all throughout the late 1800s and into the 1950s. And that's a pretty big newspaper. They're involved in all the, what do you call it, yellow journalism, et cetera. We didn't quite have time with that to get to one of their cousins. And that's who we're going to start with, because Joseph Medill Patterson, also a descendant of Medill, who's the founder of the Chicago Tribune, is their cousin. And he's also a member of Scroll and Key, class of 1901. So you got the two brothers and a cousin, all part of a media empire, right when the whole Chicago mafia is exploding. So keep that one in mind. So why do we think Mr. Medill Patterson is so exciting? He is class of 1901. He's the grandson of Joseph Medill, the founder of the Chicago Tribune. His father was someone we discussed before, Robert Wilson Patterson Jr., who was a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. But Patterson's got an interesting story. While he's at Yale, he leaves school to go report on the Boxer Rebellion as a correspondent for the Chicago Tribune.
And what was the Boxer Rebellion again?
Well, let's see. After the first Japanese-Chinese War, they were in the North, and they were really ticked off about American or European foreign influence in China. And they actually called themselves the Society of the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. They were kung fu karate fighters. And they actually believed that they were invulnerable to guns and Western weapons. Let's see. So they're really afraid of a bunch of northern Chinese villagers for the most part. Their slogan was support the Qing government and exterminate the foreigners. So they converged on Beijing. and there's a siege in the year 1900, and they're basically trying to all the foreign embassies and businesses, stuff like that, they're surrounding them. What happens is we get the 8-nation of alliance that comes back and brings about 20,000 troops in. And that alliance is made up of the United States, Austria-Hungary. These are important names because a lot of these would be fighting each other in about 10 years. The British, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Japanese, and the Russians. They put an end to that 55-day siege. Now, you've talked a lot about the Opium Wars. So what's the relation to the Boxer Rebellion and the Opium Wars? Because that's a big part of it. A lot of those countries that came in there and sent their military, they were protecting the opium business.
Correct. That was using British colony India's opium and transporting it into China. And families like the Tata family and several others were all involved and got rich in India off of the opium trade.
Yeah. Tata family just has been in the news recently because of the H-1B visa issue.
Yes, they have.
All right. So back to Mr. Patterson. So that's a pretty interesting thing to do while you're in college. You'll be the correspondent for the Boxer Rebellion.
Kind of like Winston Churchill being the correspondent for the Boer War.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So Joseph Medill Patterson comes back to the States, graduates. He serves in the Illinois House of Reps State House as a Republican from 1903 to 1905. He will go to work for the Chicago Tribune full-time in 1910. World War I breaks out, and he goes over to Europe to film propaganda films. And one of the more interesting films he did was called The German Side of the War. Right? It's probably the only film we had to show the German version of World War I. Now, we haven't talked about it too much, but if you really, if we're being real honest, we'll get to the Treaty of Versailles, but the Germans got punished for a war they didn't start and they didn't lose. And that's why my theory has always been that the main reason that war happened is because the British were envious of German industry was actually superseding them. They'd passed up. They needed to destroy the German economy. And I'd make the argument they did the same thing for World War II. Fair?
Fair.
Okay. His father dies, and we talked about this before. He takes over management of the Tribune and had disputes with his cousin, Robert McCormick. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago, or 2 episodes ago. So then he goes to New York and founds the New York Daily News. And it was a different kind of newspaper. It was the first one in America that ever used the tabloid format. And we use tabloid as kind of a snarky word for gossip, which it is, and which the New York Daily News was too. But it's more the terminology is about the format. It's just a smaller form of paper than a regular newspaper. And he learned about it because when he was in London, he observed what the newspapers they were doing, and he brought that home to the States. New York Daily News would peak at about 2.4 million copies a day in 1947, and it is still to this day a top 20 circulated paper. So he's pretty successful. We get to the 1930s. He's built up his paper, and he's in New York, and he becomes very good friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR actually asked him to be the Secretary of the Navy, but was turned down. Now, what about his bio makes you think that he's qualified to be a Secretary of the Navy?
The same that all of the assistant secretaries of the Navy and the Secretary of the Navy had absolutely zero, but they're well-connected political pawns because at the time, sea power was everything.
Kind of fits a pattern, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
He's a newspaper man, not a Navy man. He's got a sister named Sissy Patterson, who was also, she's a socialite. big time socialite. It's a wealthy family. They supported FDR's reelection in 1940, but they actually split with FDR because they opposed the foreign policy. They thought he was needlessly drawing the United States into war, and his paper was printing the same thing. Remember how difficult it was for FDR to get the American people to support the Allies?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why basically Pearl Harbor happens. And then FDR had his excuse.
Yeah.
We'll get to there in a second. His sister, Sissy, is actually leading the Washington Times-Herald, which is a paper that would eventually be folded in the Washington Post. That's a pretty long story, but he had tried to buy William Randolph Hearst's Washington newspapers, but Hearst never sold anything. Okay, so in Washington D.C. social circles, there was three, debutantes known as the Three Graces, and one of them is Sissy Patterson, and the next one was Alice Roosevelt, who is Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, and the third was you might know this name, Marguerite Cassini, who's the daughter of Arthur Cassini. Do you remember that one?
I've heard that name.
He was the Russian ambassador to the United States in that 1930s. So that's something to remember. These are small circles we're traveling in. Sissy would actually go over to Vienna and marry a royalty, a guy by the name of Count Joseph Gizicki. I think that's how it's pronounced. And that marriage failed. So it was the Times-Herald that ran the story. Sissy's paper, with their brother's help, they're the ones that ran the story that the U.S. had advanced knowledge of the Japanese task force. Roosevelt then had the Tribune and the Times-Herald indicted for espionage. He tried to, but the Attorney General, they backed down because of the bad publicity they were getting. But Sissy and Joseph were accused of being Nazi sympathizers from that day forward. Robert didn't do much else after that. He got involved. He's the guy who really started the comic strips in the newspapers. Gasoline Alley, Dick Tracy, those are his. The last interesting thing about him is one of his grandsons, this guy by the name of Joseph Albright. Want to guess who his wife was?
Madeline?
Secretary of State Madeleine Albright married Joseph Medill Patterson's grandson. Yeah, small circles, huh?
Very small, like incestuously small.
Just about. All right, who do we want to talk about next? Any comments on Joseph Medill Patterson? Kind of a continuation of the McCormicks?
No, quite interesting.
And again, this is Chicago connection with the newspapers and FDR. All right. Why don't we go to our next guy? A guy by the name of James Auchincloss. We know that name.
Yes, we do.
So we have talked about Auchincloss in the past, and we did Skull and Bones. And we first came up, the Auchincloss family, when we were talking about Oliver Gould Jennings. And his older sister was the wife of Hugh Dudley Auchincloss. Auchincloss was a Yale alumni. Remember the Elihu Senior Society, named after Elihu Yale, the founder. It's one of the oldest secret societies. Hugh was also a big investor. He bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. Bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1931, 2 years after the crash, and did very, very well. We also knew Hugh because his second wife was Nina Vidal, the only daughter of Oklahoma Senator Thomas Gore. And their son was Gore Vidal, who we talked about, who feuded with William Buckley. And Hugh's third wife also was Janet Lee Bouvier. And Bouvier is the mother of Jackie Kennedy.
Yep.
Now, we're not going to go as deep into the Auchinclosses as we could. And that's because we've got a dear friend, Dr. D. Program, who's done a much deeper dive into this family than I ever want to. But we do need to talk about James because he's scrolling key. Shout out to Dr. D program. Hope you're watching.
Absolutely.
I just love her work. James, Scroll and Key, class of 1908. He's born in Manhattan in 1885 as one of 8 children. His most famous sibling was a lawyer and stockbroker by the name of Charles C. Auchincloss. He is an interesting guy. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on him because he practiced law with a law firm called Strong and Cadwalder. And
can we also say that he went to Groton?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can. We were going to say that.
Okay.
Bear with me 1 second. I got to find my notes on Cadwalder. All right. Just a reminder, because we talked about it so long ago. Cadwalder, Wickersham, and Taft is the name of a very famous law firm. That Taft is from a guy by the name of Waters Taft, who's a relative of multiple Skull and Bonesmen and President of the United States, William Howard Taft. Henry Waters Taft co-founded it and is a partner. It founded somewhere around 1792, I think, or they took over an older firm. Cadwalder was the Assistant Secretary of State under Ulysses Grant. Once again, who runs our foreign policy?
This group.
Yes. And that's where this guy goes. That's where James goes to work at first. Once again, very small circle. Seeing some patterns here?
Yep.
He would then go to work. This is Charles, not James. I'm sorry. This is his brother. Who would then go work for a firm called Lord, Day and Lord. Remember the Lord family?
Yes. I just came across them yesterday again when I was researching the Freedom House.
So their clients are interesting. Remember, this is turn of the century, right? Most of their clients are coffee, sugar, and cocoa companies.
Oh, I'd like to say I'm shocked.
Uh-huh. Want to tell our audience why that's such an amazing coincidence?
Well, obviously, when you're in the research for Operation Gladio, coca plants, sugar are all regime change reasons to monopolize that type of industry. And it goes back to the overthrowing of the Queen in Hawaii, forward with Guatemala and Cuba and all of the Caribbean, Central American, South American, all had to do with this. And the regime change, the one we did in Panama, all of this is part and parcel for control of those resources.
Exactly. That's why I popped off the page when I was reading what they communicated. I'm being told in chat that I'm too monotone, so I will try to liven it up a little bit.
That's why you have me. I'm your sidekick.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was doing the shows with Douglas V. Gibbs, we do the deep constitution stuff, and the way it's described is, and it's same here. I'm like the play-by-play, and you guys are the color commentators.
Yes.
And it's just like a sportscast, but I do need to be a little bit more charming, I guess I should say. All right, some other clients of the Lord, Day and Lord. You got Merrill Lynch, British Airways, the New York Times, Chemical Bank, and the Astor family.
Wow.
Yeah, big time law firm. All right, so that's Charles's brother, Hugh. He also had an uncle named Hugh Dudley Auchincloss, who we mentioned just a second ago. I'm not going to go into that anymore. And of course, James attended the Cutler School in Manhattan and then the Groton School. For those who haven't heard it before, these are the grooming schools for these future Skull and Bonesmen, Scroll and Key types that they then go into all these positions of power that the rest of us, and then they tell the rest of us that it's a democracy. All right. And you really want to understand that if you go back on my channel of the Colonels, look for the Groton School, and there's a couple others we did on these grooming schools. Their list of alumni. I mean, I'm sure every one of us has a few famous people from our high school, but we don't have 100. So,
Yeah, the
all right.
famous guy at my high school turned into a criminal. So
You want to name a name?
Ray Lewis.
Ah. Well, I went to 2 high schools, so it's not really fair. But I'd say the most famous one currently would be John Lynch, now the general manager of the San Francisco 49ers.
And the Tampa Bay Bucks guy.
Yes, he was. Really nice guy, by the way. Genuinely good guy. All right.
He is a fantastic guy.
So back to maybe not such a fantastic guy, James C. Auchincloss. He in 1909 to 1913, he serves in the 7th Regiment of the New York National Guard, and he was a deputy police commissioner. In World War I, he served as a captain, and can you guess what he did in the war?
Intelligence.
Military intelligence. How would you possibly guess that? It's almost like our intelligence, you have to be from one of these families.
Yes. And I'm sure, obviously, and I want people to understand this, military intelligence are the ones that target. So if you are from one of these law firms protecting the interest of all of the people that Warhamster just named, you're going to make sure that the investments in the area are not on the target list. It's critically important.
Yeah, that's a really big point. And I think that's almost the entire point of having your people in military intelligence, more than anything.
Yes.
All right, so he gets done non-targeting his friend's property, and he goes to work for a stock brokerage firm called Auchincloss, Juice and Company. He becomes the governor of the New York Stock Exchange from 1921 to 1938 after buying a seat back in 1910. The governor of the New York Stock Exchange is a pretty important position. So he's overseeing the greatest stock run-up in history, known as the Roaring Twenties, the biggest crash in history, 1929, and he's there negotiating with FDR and all the financial reform that took place for the Investment Company Acts of 1933, 1934, and 1940, almost 40. But yeah, so he's there for all of that. Kind of a big deal.
A huge big deal.
What if I told you he's the president, treasurer, founder, and chairman of the board of the Better Business Bureau?
Oh my gosh.
And yeah. He was then elected as a Republican congressman from New Jersey in 1943 and would hold office until 1965. And he very much was in favor of all the Civil Rights Acts of the 60s. Okay, that's it for him.
That's a lot. Also, I was just kind of doing a search on him. It said he founded the Capitol Hill Club in 1951, which was a private social club for lawmakers.
Yep.
And for those of you who don't know, one of the key points is these clubs are where they compromise our legislators, our legislative representatives. Because they're private, they cater to some really twisted activity. And many of these private social clubs in DC have been investigated, and over the time, and I'm not saying this one in particular, but over the time, have been found guilty of running whorehouses and all kinds of compromising things. It's where deals are made behind the scenes.
Oh, it's almost like Jeffrey Epstein wasn't original.
Almost.
You know? Yeah. And they have the same kind of stuff. We've talked about those clubs in, New York society, going out to Newport, Rhode Island, et cetera. It really is, that's why the social status is so important. That's why, yes, they have these debutantes. Who you marry is so important. If you marry into the wrong family, you get disinherited. That's the way the society works. And that's not supposed to be the way a classless society works. But once you set those structures up, it is always going to be corrupted. exactly like you just explained.
Yep.
All right, let's get the screen back up there. We're going to close with William C. Bullitt, but I want to make a note on the last guy from this time period is a gentleman we've talked about before by the name of Dean Acheson.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was Scroll and Key, class of 1915. We've been all over. You've talked about Acheson, because he's one of the wise men. We did a whole show on the wise men, and he's one of the architects of this entire Anglo-American rules-based order in which Operation Gladio and all this regime change structures. This is one of the architects. We talked about him when we were in Skull and Bones for a number of reasons. Dean's daughter was Mary Acheson, and she married Skull and Bones alumni William P. Bundy from the famous Bundy families. And of course, he was the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs during LBJ and Nixon when Vietnam's going on. Fit a pattern?
Yeah, and Atkinson worked at Covington and Burling.
Oh, yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, we talked about that.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to go through him. Okay.
No, I'll just do a quick one because we didn't go to Dean that much, but David, his son, was a Skull and Bonesman. And by the way, Dean Acheson went to the Groton School. Because of course he did. And as you mentioned, he worked for Covington and Burling. Once again, their alumni include William Bundy, Victoria Newland, John Bolton, Mr. Indictment, Eric Holder, yes, Lanny Brewer, and a few others. What else do we have to say about the Achesons?
Well, he was instrumental in the Marshall Plan too, which is the original funding foundation for Operation Gladio.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in setting up NATO.
Yeah, and David was also president and CEO of the Atlantic Council, which was founded in 1961 by Dean Acheson, David Rockefeller, among others. Same damn pattern. Who runs our foreign policy, and who do they run it for?
Yeah, and so interestingly enough, Dean Atkinson, where I first ran across him in Operation Gladio, is not only the Marshall Plan, the creation of NATO, but the first use of that was the Korean War, and Dean Atkinson was an architect of that. And I've, with source documents, proven unequivocally that the Korean War was started with stay-behind units that was placed inside of North Korea to instigate that war.
Yeah, so this guy's part of the secret society, one of the two major ones at Yale University, as they're basically devising this entire world we live in, pulling the levers, while their classmates running the newspapers, running cover for them, etc.
Correct.
All right, let's finish up with William C. Bullitt, class of 1912. See how bald he is?
Yeah.
He started losing his hair in college and had a major psychological impact on him because his class, he was always worried that he's going to become impotent because he was going bald. That was like the rumor back then. So that's why I love that picture.
Torture.
So let's talk about William. Born in 1891 to a very prominent Philadelphia family. Family is descended from a Huguenot guy named Joseph Boulay, who would settle in Maryland in 1634. Boulay would obviously anglicize the name to Bullitt. His grandfather was a guy by the name of John Christian Bullitt. And he was a lawyer who would fund a law firm that became Drinker, Biddle, and Reith. Remember that name, Biddle?
Yeah.
Biddle's grandfather was the head of the Bank of the United States, second bank of the United States, that threatened Andrew Jackson when he was going to shut down the bank. Basically took on the president of the United States and held him to a standstill. That's the Biddle family. This law firm was the one that oversaw the brokerage firm merger that created Drexel Morgan and Company, later J.P. Morgan.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're talking big time. And J.P. Morgan, of course, has his fingers in a lot of the stories we've talked about.
Yep.
Guy by the name of Henry Drinker joins, and that's, law firms, their names merge as you get new partners, and he is actually the counsel for the University of Pennsylvania. Same Penn U that had the Biden Penn Center, where all kinds of stuff happened.
Nefarious stuff.
Charles Biddle joins the firm in 1924. The firm's still around today, and here's a really fun story for you. Their headquarters in 2001 were on the 89th floor of a building called the World Trade Center in the North Tower. The planes hit the 93rd to 99th floor. Their firm had 16 employees who had come in beforehand. Every single one of them went down 89 floors by the stairs. Not a single employee was lost, which is kind of a miracle, don't you think?
Yeah.
What did the firm do after that? Well, they were one of the major architects in drafting the legislation around the already written Patriot Act, because they were concerned about how the Patriot Act would impact insurance companies. That's this firm. Kind of interesting story, I thought. I'd get all 16 of them. Yeah. A little bit more about his grandfather, John Christian Bullitt. His famous client was a guy by the name of Jay Cooke. That's C-O-O-K-E. Not a household name, and he should be, because this is the guy who's the #1 financier of the American Civil War on behalf of the Union. We talked about Lincoln's counterfeiters a couple weeks ago, and we mentioned Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury was a guy by the name of Salmon P. Chase.
Right.
Salmon P. Chase and Jay Cooke. Well, he tabbed Jay Cooke to secure the loans from all the New England bankers, and then Salmon P. Chase hired him to sell the $500 million in what's called 5 and 20 bonds. They can be callable in 5 years, and they're redeemable in 20. Cooke was able to sell the $500 million in bonds that allowed the Union Army to basically outspend the Southern Army. He got about a 0.5% commission on that. So if you do the math, that's about $2.5 million back in 1861 dollars. So they probably made, I think, about $180 to $200 million on that deal alone in today's dollars.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Cooke was also acknowledged as one of the very first major investment bankers in the United States. So he should be a household name. My favorite story about Cooke, though, is he then moves up to Minneapolis, and he funds, with private financing, the Northern Pacific Railway, which built railroad from Minneapolis to Seattle. Now, the Intercontinental Railroad that we know, the one that was built by the government, funded, one of the federally funded internal improvements that Lincoln ran on in 1860, that made the robber baron stinky rich. That Intercontinental Railroad zigzags all across the flat areas of the Midwest because you had to bribe each town to get a railroad there. It cost 3 times more than expected, thanks to your tax dollars, and they had needed land grants from the government to even get the land in the first place. Major government handout. Cost 3 times as much as it was supposed to, and took twice as long. Cooke's Northern Transcontinental Railroad came in under budget and on time, because it's the best example of all time about how much more efficient private capital is than anything the government gets its hands on. So that's when I first learned about Jay Cooke, because that's a good story. That's good capitalism, spending your own money to build something and not using the government money. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay. Back to William C. Bullitt. Graduates Yale in 1912 and is voted the most brilliant in his class.
Whoa.
What's that?
I said, whoa. That's saying
something. Well, there's a little behind that. He only viewed school not as a place to learn, as a place to make contacts for his future political career. And There's a writing that's in his journals from when he's a child. He wrote, "I'm going to be a lawyer, a governor, a secretary of state, and a president of the United States." So he had big ambitions. And that's why he went to Yale. But why is he so brilliant? Well, he grew up in Europe, and he was already fluent in German and French. Guess what he majors in? German and French. So he actually spoke the languages better than his professors because he grew up there. So instead of studying, he got to socialize, and he's very good in sports. He's popular, and that's what he's there to do, is to network. Didn't work out too well when he goes to Harvard Law School. He does go to Harvard Law because his dad wanted him to, and his professors, he wasn't a good student. And his professors wouldn't put up with his antics in law school, and some of them, like, they give him a hard time. His dad dies in 1914, and he immediately drops out. So when he said whoa about him being the most brilliant in the class, maybe in some ways. So he drops out of law school, still 1914, and him and his mom take a trip to Moscow. They are there in 1914 when Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Somebody named Archduke Ferdinand?
Yeah.
Did they teach you in school that was the cause of World War I?
Of course they did.
Did anyone believe it?
Well, I think everybody did when they were told as a kid that that was what happened. What else would you think?
I don't know. I guess we were taught in school, but, well, you know what they're teaching in school at the time? Remember those comics of the evil, angry Huns? They made the Germans look like monsters.
Yeah.
And that was great propaganda in World War I. All right, so he's in Moscow when the war starts. So he takes the very last train out of Berlin. Basically, he's the last guy out before Germany declares war on Russia, which that's where the alliances kick in, because Germany, of course, was allied with Austria-Hungary. So it's like when I say it's a war Germany didn't start. Well, they didn't. They got sucked into it because of an alliance. So Bullitt comes home and works as a journalist. Excuse me. Excuse me. He becomes a journalist for the Philadelphia Ledger. And one of his assignments is to sail to Europe on Henry Ford's quote unquote peace ship as one of the journalists. What do we know about Henry Ford and peace?
He created the Ford Foundation, which has basically been used as a regime change CIA front for funding.
Also funded the Nazis and also funded the Bolsheviks.
Yes.
And he continued in the Vietnam War. The North Vietnamese were using Soviet trucks with Ford engines.
Yep.
You know. But he's there. And, it's funny. Bullitt on the ship was actually sending back, he was filing mocking reports about what a media circus Ford was running on it. So he was actually calling them out for what a joke it was. So Bullitt marries a socialite in 1916 named Amy Ernesta Drinker. Drinker, didn't we just hear that name? Yeah, that's that law firm we just talked about. So everything's full circle. Which is really surprising because she's a beautiful woman and Bullitt's already balding and she had all kinds of suitors. She's from one of the richest families in Philadelphia, but so is he. But for her to say yes to him was, in society, was surprising. It was actually a really unhappy marriage because this guy was, according to the biography, they said he was incapable of understanding women as persons. He just thought they were objects. He objectified women. They were nothing there to serve. They were just there to serve his needs. So that wedding didn't go too well. They take their honeymoon in Germany in 1916. And Bullitt writes that he was really impressed with the German healthcare system. Wanted to employ that here. What do we call that? Socialized medicine, right?
Yes.
So this guy is, you know where his political leanings are going.
Yes.
Somehow in 1917, he interviews a guy by the name of Colonel William House. Tell him what Colonel House is.
Well, first of all, he's not really a colonel, but
True.
He's like the secret advisor, behind the scenes mover and shaker throughout this entire time period. His name pops up in everyone's biography.
Yeah. He basically, well, Woodrow Wilson was pretty ill. And they used to say, oh, Woodrow Wilson's wife was running the country. No, it's pretty much Colonel House was doing most of that. So Bullitt interviews him. And then it becomes, they really hit it off. And House actually becomes Bullitt's mentor. They're both progressives, right? And I don't say that in a good way, because the progressive era gave us some of the worst legislation, our country ever saw. And no coincidence, the 1920 election, the Progressive Party got voted resoundingly out of power, to the point that nobody called themselves a progressive again for almost 100 years until Obama came around. So when I say progressives, it is a pejorative. So it's 1917, and Bullitt joins the army. And what do you think he does in the army?
Intelligence?
Yes. He's a fluent German speaker, so it makes sense. But yes, once again, straight to intel. How many times is that in a row?
A whole bunch.
Yeah. He would be, okay, so he's been hanging around with House for a little bit, and he's friends with Woodrow Wilson. He's basically got a backdoor pass to the White House before we jumped in, but he becomes the Assistant Secretary of State, once again, State Department Intelligence, for Europe, under a guy by the name of Joseph Grew. We've seen Grew before, right?
Yes.
Well, Grew didn't like Bullitt, because Bullitt would go run around his back and send his reports straight to Wilson, or basically to Colonel House, when he skipped over his supervisor. And there's my wasp, or yellow jacket. Can you hear him?
Uh-huh.
All right. He's not bugging me right now. He would become a really, really, he was obsessed with Russia and even the Soviets. This is, already, the Bolshevik Revolution has already happened, and he's advising Wilson to not intervene on the side of the White Russians. And who are the White Russians?
They were the people that were basically the patriots of Russia that generally wanted a non king. So in layman's terms, you would basically, if you had to pick a word, they were the patriots of the revolution that was co-opted by the Bolsheviks that were inserted into the operation. And basically, after they got rid of the king, they kind of duked it out among themselves, and obviously the Bolsheviks won.
Yeah, and one of the interesting parts is the European powers were very much involved in financing and arming the White Russians. And there's a reason for this. In 1918, the Bolsheviks, or the USSR now, basically decided they're going to default on about the equivalent of $6.5 billion in debt. Well, most of the people who lost that money about half of that debt was owned by the French. So they had a lot of monetary incentive to take out the Bolsheviks. And that debt repudiation was going to play a big part in diplomacy over the next 10 or 20 years. And our boy Bullitt is going to be smack dab in the middle of that. So that's a good little background on that. He goes to a place called the Paris Peace Conference, working directly for Wilson. And he was pushing what they were calling at the time the liberal democratic internationalism. That's the forefather of today's globalism.
And who else was there? The Foster brothers, or the Dulles brothers?
Yeah, no, they were. And a few other people. I think there were more members of Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key at that conference than any other place in history besides Yale University.
I agree.
I think there's like 7 or 8 there that we've gone through so far.
Yeah.
Okay. He would later testify in front of a Republican senator, Henry Cabot Lodge, who we know, part of the Cabot family.
Yep.
He said in public testimony in the Senate that had the American people really known what had happened at Paris, they would never have accepted the Treaty of Versailles.
Yep.
Boom. Isn't that what we've been saying?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Basically, the Treaty of Versailles, for those who don't know, the Treaty of Versailles is basically the British and the Americans basically carving up the 20th century the way they saw fit, particularly the Middle East, because, oh, coincidentally, they just discovered oil in Iran. Perhaps that's another cause of World War I, because that area was all run by the Ottoman Turks. And the Ottomans were one of the allies that got destroyed. You know, they were allies of the Germans and the Austria-Hungary. And the Ottoman Empire is no more. Coincidence? It's also where we got the foundations for the State of Israel. Kind of leave that hanging there. Kind of a big deal, huh?
Yeah.
1919, Colonel House sends a Bullitt on a secret mission to Moscow to meet with Lenin, along with a guy by the name of Philip Kerr, who's the private secretary to the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. The Brits and Woodrow Wilson they wanted friendship with the Bolsheviks. France did not, so that's why they kept this meeting a secret from the French. French wanted to get paid back their billions of dollars. So he's over there in Russia for a bit, making friends, but none of his peace deals actually went through. And a lot of people kind of speculated that they only sent Bullitt there because he was expendable. He's only 28 years old. If he fails, it's not going to kill, it's not going to hurt anybody's reputation or nobody important, at least at that level.
He was expendable.
Exactly. Got out of the diplomacy when he came home, got involved with Paramount Films, did a bunch of works that other people who are film buffs would have heard of. I didn't bother writing them down, or because I'm not a big movie buff. Sorry. Funny story. He was psychoanalyzed by a guy by the name of Sigmund Freud in 1926 in Vienna, and the two of them became very good friends.
Oh, I'm shocked. Propaganda.
Is that what is the Oedipus complex?
Yeah.
Freud is a weird dude.
Yes.
What else goes on here? By 1932, he's back in the States, and he becomes really good friends by the guy by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Small circles, right?
Yep.
Well, FDR's just gotten in and won the election in 32. He sends Bullitt to Europe to contact various European leaders. Bullitt's biggest concern there was European debt to the United States, which wasn't being paid back after World War I. So he was actually a debt collector in two different fronts. He then becomes the United States' very first ambassador to the USSR in 1933 through 1936. Back home, they would have called him a pinko.
Yeah.
So FDR wants to spend more on the Navy in the 30s due to the fear of Japan being aggressive against China and perhaps Russia. Bullitt's in the middle of this. FDR favored alignment with the Soviets to deter Japan's aggression. This guy Bullitt, who'd already met Lenin, meets Stalin in 1933. And it's a funny part of that. In his report back to America, Bullitt asked Stalin about this. What's this? We hear about this famine that wiped out millions of people near what's now Ukraine. We call that the Holodomor. Where like, was it 60 million people starved to death, or is it 30 million? Whatever, it's a lot. And Stalin would deny that it ever happened right to his face. So Bullitt gets disenchanted with the USSR. Gets furious that the Communist Party of the USA were going to go attend this big 7th World Congress of the Comintern in Russia. Spends the rest of the 1930s in France and basically communicating. This is where we're talking about deterrence with the rising Nazi power, and Bullitt's in the middle of all of that. He's the guy who called FDR then to inform him that the war had broken out in Europe. he's writing volumes at the time about the dangers of both fascism and communism. He becomes a militant anti-communist. There's so much to his story in World War II, but we already know it so well. So I'm trying to stick to the important parts that really fit our big narrative and conversation. Because I could go on you go on for a long time on what Bullitt did. He wrote a lot, and he was in a lot of places, but just there's excruciating detail about mundane meeting after mundane meeting, and I don't think we really need to go through that because we've got the big picture, right?
Right.
So he becomes really anti-communist. He's basically really now critical of FDR's foreign policy, and that fits a pattern. He'd end up being critical of Wilson, and he testified against. So when Truman gets in there, Bullitt asks for a job in his State Department, and our good old friend, remember Clark Clifford?
Yes.
Clark tells Truman, you got to worry about this Bullitt guy because he usually bites the hand that feeds him. And he did not get a job, and he didn't do a whole much in the 50s, much after that, besides do a lot of writing, some of it with Freud, about Freud and stuff like that. There's a couple of anecdotal things. He appeared with Richard Nixon at Georgetown to criticize the foreign policy of the Truman administration. He said they were too soft on communism. So Bullitt becomes pretty much a pinko to one of the biggest anti-commies in the 50s, and his writing is influencing, influencing a lot of this Cold War rhetoric. He'd left the Democrat Party by 48 and joins the Republican Party, expecting Thomas Dewey to win. Writes an article how we won the war and lost the peace. That's the critical article about Truman, and that's really he's one of the big cheerleaders. After leading in the Cold War, but this is not much. The rest of the stuff, he's like a Forrest Gump. He's popping up in a lot of places.
Well, he popped up in my research because of the late 1940s and early 1950s. He wrote a whole bunch of articles about anti-communism, and he also was involved in setting up Taiwan, and there was a lot of communication between him and Chiang Kai-shek, who we know obviously is tied to Operation Gladio and the opium trade and all that other stuff. So he did a lot to propagandize America, supporting the anti-communist movement and the World Anti-Communist League and all of the Asian Anti-Communist League. So he had a pivotal role in the propaganda, ignoring completely, as I pointed out repeatedly, that the Soviet Union was devastated after World War II. They didn't have much capability and were certainly not the threats that the people writing, such as Bullock, kind of made them out to be.
Yeah, like I said, I guess he was never to be trusted again, but somehow he was influential. It's kind of interesting how that worked without having a real position. But I'd say it's probably more about where he came from than anything else. That's all I really have for today. I mean, it's just the same story over and over again.
Yep. But I think it's important to get these patterns laid out so that people understand when you're analyzing people today, you can see those same ties and those same patterns.
Yeah, we've got to. We go through the next few decades. You're going to see some more people with scroll and key. A lot of people that are big in big corporations, Standard Oil Company, Woolworth, stuff like that. A few politicians. There's a Rockefeller thrown in there. We'll get it. There's a few more I think that are worth going through, but I think we might be able to wrap up scroll and key in the next maybe week or two.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. we've gotten the deep history done pretty good. And I almost feel like we're going to start getting a little repetitive because we're circling back to everything we've already said. But,
but that's the patterns that have to be established.
Yeah. And I'm thinking where we want to go. We've talked about where we go after Scroll and Key. My thought is that we really ought to talk about Columbia University and its connection to the CIA, because someone's got to do that show. It may as well be us.
I agree. And
then,
it'd be a good transition into some of the others, like the Pilgrim Society and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I really want to hit the foundation soon because, I mean, we're climbing up the ladder of how things really work, but it's the foundations. They're the ones calling all the shots today. And all the people we're talking about, they're the ones who, basically created those institutions, foundations, et cetera.
Yeah. And having this foundation to then transition. But I do think before we get to the foundations, understanding the bridge, because we've alluded to the fact that UK is behind a lot of this. And there's a lot of people out there that says all roads lead to the City of London. I do think making that tie so that people understand it isn't just the US. While we're Americans and we focus on the US, doing that bridge and then moving on to the foundations, I think is critically important.
Yeah, I mean, we've hit it, when we talked about dollar princesses and all that sort of thing. And
Yes.
We've talked about the Fabian Society and, how they basically created the Gilded Age here, and the robber barons merged with the Fabian Societies and then gave us the entire progressive and socialist movement here, and which turned into the technocratic movement, all the above. Yeah, and there's definitely a connection. It's why they call it the Anglo-American rules-based order. Our foreign policy has been tied. It's absolutely been tied to the hip with England's pretty much since 1915. There was strong alliances before that, but it really, once we went to war with them to save their bacon, and they had their intelligence agency created ours, and they've been joined at the hip ever since. Created the Five Eyes, all the above, and we've defended British. Yeah, we've been defending a lot of military lives have been lost defending British property. So
correct.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to jump the pond. And
okay.
I've got some really fun stuff on a couple of the early Fabian socialists, particularly a guy by the name of Cecil B. Rhodes. So
yeah, I can't wait for that.
That should be. We'll get there eventually. You're traveling next week, right?
I am. So I will be able to do the show on Friday, though, just not Thursday.
Okay. Let me just check the calendar so we can tell everyone now. Come on, calendar. That is Halloween. Yeah, I can make that. And I think we should have costumes.
I'm not dressing up. Sorry.
I'll come up with something.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you next week on Friday at noon.